readiness, and response. My name is Avril Belfon, and I'm welcoming you as the president of CABICA, the Caribbean branch of the International Council on Archives, as we go through this webinar to build capacity in our region for the management of emergencies and disasters using the fact of first aid in cultural heritage methodology developed by ICCROM. This work has been conceived within the framework of CARICOM, CARICOM, you see CARICOM is on my mind, within the framework of ICCROM's flagship program on first aid and resilience for cultural heritage in times of crisis, and its capacity building project on Culture Cannot Wait, Heritage for Peace and Resilience, and supported by the Swedish Postcode Foundation. And of course, we thank them for their support and guidance during this project. I thank, of course, all of you who have rejoined us again. I know we've been going for a little while. This is day 4. I do hope you're all hearing me. I'm seeing some comments in the chat, so I hope that means participants are hearing. And do feel free to let us know if there are any challenges. Or you may type into the chat any issues. Our admin, I'm so sorry, I should start by, of course, introducing our team. We've had the able-bodied, hard-working team of Halcyon Wilshire Busby as a member of CABICA and also an alumni of the FACT training, and Samuel Franco, also an alumni of the FACT training. So Halcyon is the assistant archivist at the West Indian Federal Archives in Cave Hill campus on Barbados. As I said, she's a member of CABICA, as well as someone who's been involved in this training under ICCROM. And then Samuel Franco is the director of Cultural Emergency Center in Guatemala, the Casa Coham, and I'm sure I'm probably mutilating that a little bit, but he is also an alumni of this training and has done several of them around the region and internationally. And we thank them, of course, for their work over the last few days. And as we continue, we also have here with us our admin person who will assist. This is Ariana. You'll see her listed as admin in the chat. And any issues you have, as I said, feel free to type in. So let us know whatever challenges you're facing, or if you need to make a comment, question. And during the Q&A, there will be sections for Q&A. And at that point, you can also raise hands. And the host can unmute you, and then you can make your comment. But generally, the chat is open and free for you to let us know what is going on, so we could make sure that you're getting the best advantage to the webinar. And I don't want to delay, because I know my presenters have told me that we have a packed program today, and I think we will get immediately into it. I would like to introduce Mr. Samuel Franco, who will give you a brief recap from where we've been thus far and where we're going today. And we'll start out our session today. We're going to be looking at assessment. We're actually going to be like, if you're on site, the incident has happened, and then security and stabilization. And then at the end, we're going to round up with just a way that we can start preparing and making ourselves ready for any such instances of emergencies or disasters that may happen, and how we can protect our cultural heritage. So, Samuel, I'm opening the floor to you.
Thank you, Avril. Hello. So hello, everyone from Guatemala. We'd like to say hello once again, and thank CABICA and all the organizers for giving me the opportunity to share some knowledge, information, and experiences with all of you. It is a pleasure to share with all the Caribbean brothers and sisters all the knowledge and experiences that we all share in this part of the world. I wish, let's see. Okay, so as Avril mentioned, we have been talking about cultural heritage risk management in our previous chapters. We have analyzed the three stages of an emergency, which are before, during, and after. And I would like just to do a small recap of what we covered in the previous session. So we introduced the cultural heritage first aid concept, which and also I would like to go back to the framework of the cultural heritage first aid action. So we mentioned that there are three basic steps that are within this framework. And in the last session, we talked about the situation analysis. And today, we're going to address the next two steps, which are the on-site damage and risk assessment, and then the security and stabilization that will lead us into the early recovery phase at the end. So an important issue that it was mentioned in the previous session that was that throughout the whole process, we must have these three major main factors or elements which are very important all along the process, which are documentation, risk management, and communication and coordination. These elements are basic for every stage of the process because documentation has to be taken from the very first moment we arrive to a site that has been affected. By documentation, we mean to take photographs, to film, to make, look at the first, the inventories, the before and after. Risk management includes also to be careful, to be with the objects, but not only with the objects, but with the human lives of our first aiders or rescuers, because anything can happen as a secondary hazard, like earthquakes have post-event replicas, and if we are inside a building that without taking the security measures, we might be affected by these secondary effects. Then communication and coordination, it is very important because right now, for example, we are in peace times and we are calm, we are, very easy does it, but when the panic arrives during an emergency, people's behavior changes. The stress, nerves, and the whole situation. So communication can become a chaos if messages are not addressed properly, and also can have an effect in the recovery process. Coordination also, since risk management, it's a very systematic method, has to be very systematic. Coordination is essential since we are dealing with many people, many actors, volunteers, people who probably do not have experiences with this. And then the early recovery will be addressed today, which is like the rehabilitation period once the object or the site has been secured. So I'm not going through the whole presentation, but that's the basic, the basic framework of the first aid. So we covered, I'm just going fast through the presentation we did last session for those who were not able to attend. We talk about what is the profile of a cultural first aider. That should be a resourceful person, people-focused, action-oriented. Also, why is it important to coordinate cultural heritage first aid with the overall emergency response, like the SEDEMA or civil protection, the army, and so on, because we are a team, and I will talk more about it in the following slides. So also we talk about situation analysis, which is the step number one in the framework of first aid. What is it? What is really situation analysis? The process where we collect, analyze, and plan. We collect data from different sources, from different actors, and then we analyze the data in order to proceed for a plan of action, which includes teams, what kind of expertise, what kind of equipment, tools, vehicles, whatever. So this is another graph of the context analysis or situation analysis, whether we assess if it's how critical the event might be, if it's a minor event, if it's a very big, a major one, and also the context and legal framework, if it's a government institution, a university, a private, or a community, or if it's a religious place. There are many options or situations where every context is different. So that's why we have to analyze the specific context of the site or the object or institution that has been affected. And also the actors and local capacities, the stakeholders, who are part of this, the local capacities around the island or the neighborhood or the community, if there are firemen, fire brigades, if there are Red Cross, if there are health, hospitals, storage areas, safe storage, and so on. A heritage-specific SWOT, what are the threats, the strengths, the opportunities with this, with the particular heritage or site we are dealing with. Then the permission, access, and preparation for deployment. So, that's part of the process. We analyze the context of the marriage, of the emergency, the cultural heritage affected, and identification of stakeholders and actors. Then Halcyon addressed her presentation oriented on the affected cultural heritage. We have two considerations: establish the coordinates of heritage sites, the significance, the local belief systems, if there's a community site that has been affected, and the way we have to behave as a first aiders, also with respect to the community, to the religion, to the gender, to the diversity, in order to be gentle and to be, not somebody that comes to create more problem into the situation, but somebody who comes to help, to assist. So data collection, it's important because this data will tell us what we need. The stakeholders and actors, which can be different. Like, for example, here we have a nice map of stakeholders and actors. Here we have the State Board of Antiquities, which might be the one who give permissions to proceed to do a first aid, to conduct some recovery. And then this is connected to the local heritage organizations and professionals, the Minister of Culture, or the first responders, the civil protection, the local experts also, if there are paper conservators, textile conservators, or whatever. Foreign, and this connects with the foreign cultural heritage first aiders and institutions like ICCROM, Prince Claus Fund, Smithsonian and United Nations, UNESCO, etc. The local community also plays an important role. The religious board, in case of if we are in a community that has a very particular religious beliefs, we have to consult with them also. So, and then the military, which of course is the main partner we should have when there is an emergency, because they are the ones who really go in the field and have the infrastructure such as helicopters, boats, trucks, to mobilize not only supplies, but people, food. You also for people who might be stranded in the middle of an emergency. And remember, human lives is always the priority. We are passionate about our cultural objects, but human lives are the priority. So this is all concerned to the endangered cultural heritage. Then we can also measure the level of influence we have in the relationship with these stakeholders and actors, like if it's low, if it's medium, it's high, it's weak, moderate, and so on. So, like stakeholders in the Caribbean context, Halcyon mentioned SEDEMA, CARICOM, CARBICA, CHEN, and then, of course, the civil protection, like Army, Coast Guards, Air Guards, and Department of Emergency Management. And then we talk a little bit about analyzing the information that has been collected. We identified which cultural heritage assets are more significant, which were more damaged, and also the vulnerabilities to secondary hazards, which can lead to further damage and deterioration. So to conduct assessments, we have uniform assessment forms, and these have to be in formats that can be understood by all stakeholders, because remember that not everyone speaks or understands our language of culture or our language of first cultural aiders. So we must try to be very simple when we communicate our needs. Also, the expertise required, like another considerations, because before the expertise, it's defined by the type of object or site that has been affected. If we need archaeologists, if we need textile conservators, paper conservators, and so on. And other considerations about security, utilizing the map, the tools, the strategies of communication, and this plan that we are going to create after gathering all this or collecting all this data can help us to predict the time period, the size and scope, costs, and objectives of on-site operations, the roles and responsibilities of each actor, the permissions, the communication plan. If they speak, we have to, if there is another language spoken or a very colloquial language or dialect, we need translators. We have to consider all these, the safety and quality control, the criteria of how we are going to evaluate, what kind of regime we're going to use for monitoring. So the conflict analysis also, it's a tool that helps to identify the root causes of a conflict and to understand the triggers that may turn into a latent conflict into a violent one. So it is important to do this analysis of the causes of the analysis, the actors involved in the analysis, and the dynamics of the content, like if we think it is going to evolve into a major problem or if it is going to diminish. So that is what we covered. Just to recap, now we will go into today's presentation, which is post-event on-site damage and risk assessment. So to conduct this activity, we have to go on site, of course. Once the emergency has happened, we are going to the site to conduct an initial damage assessment and risk assessment also. And then that will also help us to define the priorities for intervention, what needs to be treated or attended immediately, or what needs a triage or some kind of emergency stabilization process before it gets more damage. Then, of course, if we're dealing with a community or some assets or sites or objects that belong to a community, we have to consult with the community and build a consensus, because we may encounter contingencies, we may encounter opposition, and also we have to be very respectful. Like, for example, I will put you an example that happened in Nepal after the 2015 earthquake. A lot of sacred temples were damaged, and rescuers have to rescue the rubble, I mean, pieces, objects that were among the rubble. And to go on this site, of course, the foreign rescuers came with the uniform, with boots, helmets, goggles, and all the personal protection, personal equipment required. But the local Nepalese didn't want them to use shoes, or they were barefoot, because this, according to their religion, you have to be without shoes when you go into a sacred place. So that kind of conflicts you may encounter. How do you resolve it? How do you build a consensus to explain that for security you may have to use shoes, but because there's maybe glass on the floor, that can affect the rescuers. But this is just an example, of a case. And then why do we undertake on-site damage and risk assessment? We conduct the on-site assessment because it provides the opportunity to assess the physical nature of the affected heritage within its environment and identify the required security and stabilization actions. And also to note the ways the disaster has affected the broader group of stakeholders, as an example, by talking to the community, local leaders, vendors who sold souvenirs on or near an archaeological site, for example, or operators of nearby guest houses, hotels and people that have this tourism infrastructure for visitors to these sites. Identify immediate risks and their respective mitigation measures. And also it helps us to estimate site-specific costs for security and stabilization actions and full recovery. Why undertake on-site damage and risk assessment? Again, on-site damage and risk assessment can be used to secure the necessary funds for cultural heritage, first aid, and recovery. Such an assessment can inform a post-disaster needs assessment, a PDNA, which I think Halcyon mentioned, introduced it a couple of sessions ago, but we will talk more about it, about the post-disaster needs assessment, known as PDNA, which is a multi-sector assessment method, which helps affected governments to determine direct effects, long-term impacts, and recovery needs in the aftermath of a large-scale disaster. Some countries have their own methods for assessing recovery needs after a disaster. A PDNA is carried out only when a country requests assistance from international organizations, such as the United Nations, for example, or UNESCO, which are usually the organizations who run this, conduct this PDNA, this methodology. So this is like a workflow chart of how to undertake integrated on-site damage and risk assessment. So we have a few steps. We have here 6 steps. First, we prepare, then we inspect the site, then we record damage and effects on the disaster, we assess and record immediate risks, we compile and analyze the data, we prepare the assessment report, and finally, we update plan for the on-site actions. So if we take each step of this workflow chart, we will initiate with preparation. So how do we prepare? Prepare involves obtaining permissions and contacts to be deployed to conduct the on-site assessment. Then we prepare the team. We have to know what kind of team we need, what kind of expertise, what kind of resources, human resources we need. Then gather pre-event data, because all sites and museums have pre-event data of how the site was before the event or the object. So in case of a museum, for example, or archives, we refer to inventories, pre-event, because after the event, objects and archives documents might have to be temporarily removed to another location to mitigate the damage. So that is why it is very important to have pre-event data, tools and equipment. Okay, we cannot go to a site to conduct on-site damage and risk assessment without the tools and equipment necessary. We need cameras, GPS. It depends also on the specific context. We may need, there is a list of tools that we may require and that will be addressed later by Halcyon. So also the logistics and means of communication, like for example, we are now experiencing, we have just experienced the ETA tropical depression in the area that affected Nicaragua, Honduras, and Guatemala, and the Caribbean area, and the Atlantic. And the only way to get there is by helicopter right now, because a lot of bridges, roads collapse, there are landslides, we cannot move by land. So a lot of the logistics involve helicopters and boats. So that's an example of, and also the communication due to hurricanes or this event of this storm, for example, we know that communication towers are the ones who may fall down because of the winds, because of landslides. So we have to have resources to communicate, you know, like satellite telephones, walkie-talkies also for intercoms nearby from boat to boat or from one location to another in case the cellular phones break down. Also, coordinate your plan. You know, coordination of plan means how you're going to mobilize people, tools, how you're going to access, and so on. In terms of the second stage, which is about inspecting the site, first we identify areas clear or blocked, mark access points on the site plan. Part of our preparation tools, I would say, we have to have maps or sketches of the site we're going to go or the object that we're going to treat. Because in case of a site, you know, we have to find out for security reasons whether it has many doors, many gates or access, and we have to make sure that they are clear or if they are already secure for looters or for people that we do not want to be in the site for looting or vandalism or whatever. And if we have a map, we mark those access points on the site plan. Identify and mark, if necessary, the safe access routes to the site. If we deploy a team of volunteers or people, first aiders, first responders, we have to know the safe access routes. You know, we do not want any accidents or any casualties or any problems with our personnel. So in order to be safe, it would be better if we can mark them on the site plan also. And also the route for vehicles access. Let's say we're bringing supplies, we're bringing food, tools. These trucks must have a route of access and also a route of evacuation in case of emergency. You know, in case the storm comes back or there's a second quake, or, you know, we also have to consider an evacuation route for not only for you know, for especially for our human resources, but also for objects or artifacts that might need to be evacuated to a safe place for stabilization and rehabilitation. Also, if there is a visible damage to building, consult a structural engineer before you go in. Let's say we have the building of the government we train in San Martin. No, the new one is very nice though, but I understand the old building was affected. So let's say we go to the building, we want to go into the building after an earthquake. We cannot just go in. We have to get assessment from a structural engineer in order and wait to be approved to go in. You know, once we are sure that no wall or anything hanging lamps or, you know, any structure might collapse, while our staff is going in. And I mentioned in a previous session the case of Brazil, the National Museum of Rio de Janeiro 2 years ago. It took like 8 months for first aiders to go in because they had to secure the building. So it was for safety. Then you have to identify the main structural elements to see whether it's a frame structure on frame, because if it is on frame, there is a lot of risk that for collapse, especially if it has been exposed to water or to quakes. You know, the structure becomes a little bit weaker. So with help from local emergency managers, we can identify safe work and storage spaces for volunteers and first aiders to conduct security and stabilization actions. So we have to, once Halcyon does the presentation about security and stabilization, you will now understand this point clearer, because when we do on-site risk assessment damage, we also mobilize objects after that, but we have to make sure that we mobilize objects and people to a safe place, and they have enough, the necessary conditions to assist, like, to stabilize whatever may need to be stabilized. Identify and record damage to basic services and infrastructure. It is important to identify whether there is a water leak, if the water pipes, for example, has been damaged, if the electricity has been damaged, the electrical system, to prevent fires, if there are gas supplies, pipes of gas, if there was a kitchen in the museum or institution, we have to make sure that to block all these sources that may give us problem. So gas, water, electricity. Find out if the site has external or unwanted debris. For example, after an earthquake, there's a lot of debris around, so we have to make sure that is that is not affecting the route or any logistics. So then you have to record damage and effects of the disaster, mark the damage on the site map. In the case of the affected building, record only the outside damage from a safe distance. Don't go in until you have the authorization to conduct an interior survey. Take a context photograph of the damage, describe the type of damage, its location, and its severity of the assessment form. Identify buildings or rooms that have suffered major damages, prepare a separate assessment form for each building. Talk to people who work or live at the site. They may have valuable information about what is underneath the rubble or about the situation before you arrive. Record economic losses. Like, for example, now we're living a tropical storm that had landslides and killed people because the landslides came into a living complex. So the firemen, the cultural first aiders are asking the local people who used to live there, who lived there, how many people live there, because they said that there were 100 people that were living there, that they have disappeared. So they might be buried underneath the rubble. But if we don't have that information from the local people, after 72 hours, which is the protocol for response in our civil protection agency, they might leave the place without continuing looking, and there might be people still alive. And yesterday they rescued an old man with 74-year-old who was buried for 4 days. Amazing story. 4 days on the rubble, and they recovered him alive, 74 years old. So, we cannot just give up. Record damage and effects of the disaster. And there are different ways, we have talked about how to identify, to record the damage of built heritage. Now we're talking about objects and collections, which are different. This is movable objects, and basically very identify and mark the location of the room, area, contain damaged cultural heritage objects on a floor plan if available. Otherwise, use a sketch plan, use a pre-event inventory to determine the numbers of objects damaged, the materials that they are made from, such as stone, wood, paper, metal. This information should be recorded on your damage and risk assessment form. Try to identify the type of extent of damage, record whether the objects are exposed to the environment or hazardous materials, such as chemicals or human waste, and take photographs of the damaged objects. You will need them together in one of multiple files. Take one of wide shot of each pile, I mean multiple piles, not files. Take one wide shot of each pile, record the reference numbers and photographs and so on. So to record effects of a disaster on intangible cultural heritage, we guide the community to ensure that they do not only take into account the major festivals or events, consider the different categories of the 2003 UNESCO for safeguarding intangible cultural heritage, which includes oral expressions, language, performing arts, social practices, rituals, festive events, local knowledge, traditions, crafts. The assessment should include the performance of, access to, and transmission of the affected intangible heritage. All these three are strongly interconnected. To continue, as a continuation of this process of recording damage and effects on the intangible cultural heritage, document the tangible assets that are related to the intangible heritage, such as places, sites, objects, holy places, sacred places, costumes, tools. Communicate with people, including the performers, practitioners, spiritual leaders, and elders. The assessment should look at how the bearers of intangible heritage have been affected. And finally, identify the assets, traditions, and knowledge. This is probably the most difficult step in an evaluation because it will allow us to estimate the extent of change brought by the disaster and the effect this may have over time. Like, for example, the change of materials for a mask or for a traditional dance. Due to the event or the emergency, they may continue the tradition or the practice. But due to the emergency and the limited availability of materials maybe, or mobility, the mobility restrictions, they may conduct their ceremony, but with different materials. So you have to document all these changes and see whether they are going to come back when normal time after the event, where they are going to recover or recapture the original materials, or they will stay with the new plastic or styrofoam materials instead of the original ones. So to assess and record immediate risks, we have to consider that every hazard has a secondary hazard. For example, so we talk about primary hazards and secondary hazards. That's very important. That's a concept that you should all keep in mind always. Because, for example, natural hazards such as an earthquake can have secondary hazards such as fires, landslides, tsunamis, liquefaction. Floods can lead to landslides, mold, mildew, corrosion. Tsunamis can lead to fire, floods, hurricanes to fire, wind damage. Fire can lead to water damage, mold, corrosion, volcanoes to fire, landslide, earthquakes, human-induced hazards, warfare, fire, terror, vandalism. And here is not included, and I included it somewhere else before in another presentation I did last week. It is the pandemic. Pandemics are not included in this chart. And that's something we will have to update in every manual. Nobody thought about COVID-19 or something similar. And that has a lot of secondary hazards for a long time, especially on intangible cultural heritage. A lot of our festivals, traditions are being affected due to these restrictions that are for the COVID. And also on the tangible side, on the material side, for example, if we have had our museum or our archives closed for more than 7 months, we will have problems with pests, termites, mice, spider webs, mold that has grown because of limitation of staff, limitation of continuous monitoring that probably we had before the pandemic. So this is an example of what we're living today, and who knows what will come in the future. But pandemics should also be included as hazards, and they take all over the world, not only your institution, but institutions all over the planet. So you compile the data, you systematically digitize the assessment forms and sketches for each type of heritage immediately after the on-site assessments. For interviews, also the same. Interviews with the stakeholders, you have to gather the notes or transcripts and store them together with the data, download the photographs from your camera and link them to the digital copy of the floor plans to the reference numbers, connect the data contained in the assessment form or to the site map floor plans. And if you were not able to do so at the site, prepare your risk statements and identify the level for each statement. So finally, collect and categorize and store all the data from the site in a standardized database to ensure easy access and analysis by anybody. You know, I mean, that's again a communication issue. So prepare an assessment report, which includes the significance of the heritage, the nature of the disaster or conflict, what happened, when, description of the damage to the built and movable heritage and the effects on the disaster on intangible heritage, losses, if there were any, with reference to people, a specific income or infrastructure concern, and long-term negative effects of losses on the affected cultural heritage, risk statements, immediate on-site security, and the report must mention the date, the author's names, and contact details of all those involved in the on-site assessments. So finally, update plan for implementing on-site actions. A consolidated damage and risk assessment report can be used to elaborate the plan for implementing the on-site security and stabilization actions identified during the situation analysis. It is particularly useful for prioritizing site specifications, for example, provided a temporary cover to expose damaged structural elements, and it also helps to determine the kind of resources and expertise required to stabilize each affected cultural assets. The PDNA, we already talked about it, the aim is to conduct a needs assessment and development a recovery framework which will feed into joint requests for emergency funding. And can serve as the basis for the establishment of a national level recovery priorities as well as funds. As a PDNA is meant to inform fundraising appeals. It is usually carried out within 4 to 6 weeks of the disaster. The most direct outcome of a PDNA is a report that consists of 2 parts, the needs assessments and the recovery framework. This report is a collection of different sectoral reports, including one for culture. And usually it is conducted by the government. This is at the national level, conducted with also together with UNESCO, United Nations, because this is a call to the international help. So we have there is a form in the manuals. You will be able to download the First Aid to Cultural Heritage Handbook and also the toolkit. And there you have a lot of exercises related to what we are addressing in these sessions. And of course, we can, due to the time and the intensity of the content, the amount of content and the information to be shared with you, you will have to follow the manuals if you want to find more details, as we are covering this as from a very basic point of view. So I'm going to try to switch to switch documents as I have the manual, some templates that I would like to share with you related to the issue of on-site damage assessment. Now I would like to, I have the document on my screen, but I cannot find the share screen.
Share screen.
Okay, I am able now to share the screen. So here on the screen, which is very small, we have one template. Okay. Can I put this full screen? Okay. So we have this on-site assessment template. So there are there's the template one. You will find this in the toolkit, which is part of this manual. The handbook and toolkit are two separate publications, two separate books. So, for example, this is a template that you can do an exercise while you go back to your institutions. So you have to fill the date, the name, the contact, where, and then there are different levels of doing the assessment. So the level one would include the region, the city, the area, and then you have all these parameters like these questions: name of the city, description of the incident, nature of the primary hazard, if it was natural, man-made. Then we have a level two, which are the name for the site, name of the site, location of the site. Always use the coordinates. You always use a GPS. Now all the smartphones, mainly most smartphones, have GPS, because that is the way the army works. If we need a helicopter to be deployed to a particular on-site location, we have to give them the coordinates in order to arrive, because sometimes there are a lot of foreign assistance. Like right now, we're getting through this tropical storm emergency, we are getting help from the US Army, and they don't know where the site is, so they need coordinates to arrive to the exactly location that we need. Level of protection, the degree of damage, and so on. Then we have templates related to building. Name of the building and who owns the building, and so on. Then we have another template for the hazards, what kind of, where was it affected, the wall, the roof, the floor, the structural elements, which the primary hazard, in this case, an earthquake, secondary hazard, there are aftershocks, what are the immediate risks that, an 18th century wooden element may collapse, the vulnerability factors, is it poorly, is it high, is it low, and so on. And then the level 4 template will take us to objects and collections, so the same process and related questions to objects and collections. And finally, we will have the for intangible heritage template. So, so you have all these tools in your manual. in the toolkit, I mean, which is part of the manual, and so on. So I'm just scrolling fast to give you an idea of what these templates look like. But I think the best thing is that you download these objects from ICCROM.org, ICCROM.org, and you go to publications and you look for the First Aid to Cultural Heritage Handbook and toolkit. So with this, I think I finished my presentation about on-site damage and risk assessment. So I leave the floor to Halcyon.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Ariane, do we have any questions for Samuel's presentation?
Hi, yeah, we had a question and a comment that Avril noted that we'll take them after your presentation.
Okay, not a problem. So for our first timers here, I'm Halcyon Wilshire Busby, an archivist at the West Indies Federal Archives Center and the Keefield Campus Archives, and I'm also a cultural first aider. So what I'll be sharing with you today revolves around security and stabilization. So I'll share my screen. Okay. Is everyone seeing it? Okay. So what's depicted here is actually my FAC classmates and I, well, it was about 19 of us. We did an exercise in regarding stabilization of a building, and this was actually conducted in Norcia, Italy. And Norcia, Italy suffered a devastating earthquake in 2016. So we actually had we did damage assessments, as Samuel stated, and we also conducted exercises in actually shoring up buildings and so on. So what is actually depicted here is a mechanism to actually shore a building, or you put against a building to stabilize the building to prevent further damage. So what are security and stabilization? So it's termed as the temporary actions implemented to ensure affected heritage does not incur further damage through risk reduction. This can be done by conservation treatment, and that could be employed. So what we have depicted here in this photograph is actually a picture of a gingerbread house in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. And the gingerbread houses were, they started establishing the gingerbread houses in about the 1880s. So the latter part of the 19th century. And these buildings are historic relics for what they epitomize, or what their value are is to the Haitian society. Also, after the earthquake of 2010, a number of these buildings, about 5% of these buildings actually stood up after the 2010 earthquake. And it gives you and there were buildings way younger than these buildings, these gingerbread houses, as they were termed by the Americans. They withstood the effects of the earthquake. So what you're seeing there at the bottom of the building is an attempt at shoring the building or keeping the building stable. When it showed signs of cracks and so on. And it's actually listed on the World Monuments site as an endangered relic of Haitian architecture that they're trying to maintain. So that's just an example within our regional context, and showing you an example of how they try to show this side of the building. So why is security and stabilization important to cultural first aid? So security and stabilization are context dependent. So you have to look at the sites that you're examining. So before, as Samuel mentioned before, you have to look at the community context. You cannot just go in and just say you're going to carry out stabilization exercises without having the right permissions, right? So, and when you've been given the permissions, so what has to be conducted in terms of the actions? You have to document the heritage assets, and you have to also state what actions you'll be putting in place to stabilize and secure these assets as well. So who carries out security and stabilization? So first and foremost, so cultural first aiders. So cultural first aiders could be archivists, they could be conservators, architects, structural engineers. Once you have the requisite training, you can carry that out. Also, the military or first responders, fires, and search and rescue teams. The military and firefighters, for instance, they're used to carrying out exercises where stabilization of buildings are concerned. But it will be really lovely to marry stabilization of buildings, for instance, and also understanding the heritage or the cultural context and the historical context attached to these buildings. So that's why it's important to have these stakeholders on board so that they understand why you're trying to preserve various relics within our communities. So the other considerations we need to make as it pertains to this revolves around the tangible elements and the people. So when we're looking at security and stabilization, you say, for instance, a church or a mosque, a temple, it's considered a tangible element, but you also have to look at the intangible, where people carry out their or practice their religious activities, how they go about it, and also engage the community, find out what they would like to happen in relation to securing their assets. So it runs the full gamut in that you have to look at it from the tangible, and this is an instance of the tangible also informing the intangible, making people aware that culture is what sustains us. People's religious beliefs, in certain instances, it sustains us. So working in conjunction with our religious bodies, for instance, or it could be clubs or other bodies that involve the congregation of peoples. We have to be cognizant of that. So the security and stabilization actions that we could employ. So for instance, an erecting of a fence around the affected site or collection. One, it may ward off people from going to the affected site. It's actually saving you from yourselves, because you have instances where people are extremely curious and they want to go into sites to see what has happened, and also to prevent the possible looting within these various sites when damaged. So also providing temporary cover for the exposed built elements, fragments, and objects. So sometimes that may entail putting tops over certain buildings. just to lessen the amount of exposure that actually comes into the buildings. But you also have to look at the elements. You have to look at what the context is, what the situation involves. And also looking at heritage objects being evacuated to a safe site post-event. So this is where security factors in again. Looking at how you're going to stabilize or to secure an area to provide the proper evacuation of artifacts, various types of textile, documents for safe housing. And you also have to go through the process of salvage, which Samuel alluded to previously. Going through, you have instances where you will have to, as a cultural first aider, you will have to go through rubble after the building, for instance, has been secured and you've been cleared to enter. You have to go through a salvage process, and that takes a certain amount of time. It's painstaking. It can be seen as a painstaking process, but it's quite worthwhile after. And also safe and so this leads to safe and secure temporary salvage. The mechanisms we're putting in place has to be emphasized as a temporary measure. What you're doing is just to secure the items, ensure that it's evacuated adequately, and then steps would have to be put in place for their safe storage. So as I mentioned previously about the shoring of a building or a wall structure, to ensure that the shoring of a building or a wall, it happens for a certain time, just to ensure that the building does not collapse until other structural measures could be put in place to ensure that it's actually secure. So how is security and stabilization achieved? So what I have here is an example from Barbados, where I currently reside. And this actually happened a couple of months ago in September at a restaurant in Speightstown, Barbados. And Speightstown of itself, it's an old city. It was founded at about in and around the middle of the 17th century, about the 1630s. And this particular restaurant, there was a fire within the kitchen of this restaurant called Juma's. And you can see what's depicted there, the fire actually taking place. And it was a very rainy night, I remember, and the rain helped, and also with the fire tenders, to prevent the fire from going on to too many buildings. The building next to Juma's, as you could see there, you could see it standing, but it was badly affected when the fire took place. And you had instances where the roads within Speightstown were blocked off as a result of the fire. But what happened here? A cultural heritage site was destroyed, Speightstown being one of the oldest towns in the Caribbean. And there was a loss of jobs, and this happened in the middle of we're still in the throes of the COVID pandemic. But Barbados was opening up, restaurants and so on. So people have lost their livelihoods. Barbados has lost part of its tangible heritage, and things had to be put in place to ensure that, people could traverse the roads again and ensure that no looting, etc., was put in place. So this picture is a little grainy, but it just shows a barrier to the building that was on fire. It really affected a lot of us who reside in the parish of St. Peter in Barbados. So looking at security and stabilization. So as previously mentioned, we have to erect safety barriers. just to ensure for safety of people and also safety of the whatever resources may have survived a disaster. So as Samuel mentioned before about checking utilities, utilities have to be checked because you cannot go into a building that has been under disaster. You don't know if there's been a gas leak, and that it could spark a fire. You also have to look at the electrical outputs to ensure you have no live wires that could actually spark another fire as well. And you also have to look at the rubble, for instance. So this is why it's important that the posting of signage to warn people about the dangers of entering certain sites is quite paramount. Before even carrying out a salvage or security and stabilization exercise, you have to ensure that the pathways are secure when conducting this exercise. And you have to provide temporary cover and put temporary measures in place to ensure that you can actually enter a building, for instance, or go into a site after a disaster has taken place. And removal of hazardous waste is always paramount as well, because even in instances of fires or even earthquakes, you may have instances where hazardous waste it starts flowing to the top. Say, for instance, it could be from a nuclear site, or it could be raw sewage that you're encountering. So you have to be extremely careful. And in terms of after a structure has been wet, to ensure that the wet structures and surfaces are totally dried out. So actually a picture here, the picture to the top is actually an exercise that a final exercise carried out while in Nurture. And I was documenting the items and as part of the simulation that was carried out by us in Rome. So even after you carry out a salvage exercise, you have to designate or put in place areas for temporary storage of the holdings that you would have saved. That is quite paramount, because it's all well and good to go and save these things, but you have to identify a place to store for a time until you're able to build back better. Monitoring is important. So I want you to note that stabilization methods for buildings is temporary. So you can't show up a building and leave it there for a year and say, okay, that's good, and nothing is happening. Actually, in terms of the monitoring process, it should, after the shoring of a building, it should be looked at least every 12 hours to see if there are any shifts or cracks that would be evident within the building. And by assessing and monitoring the building, it will give you, and documenting the process, it will give you an idea of what is going on with the building. So you have to examine the shoring that you have put in place to ensure that the building is not going to falter. So as mentioned previously, in terms of post-evacuation, so it involves documenting everything you've evacuated, including pieces of material that if it's a ceramic, for instance, that may have been cracked. Those things could be put back together by a conservator. We also have to look at packaging and the method of transportation that will be used by or for the evacuation of the materials. So I thank you, and we'll move along to Samuel again.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Halcyon, and also Samuel, for your presentations on these topics of assessment, security, and stabilization. We're going to be opening the floor for two items, both for questions and answers, of course, and then we're going to be looking at some practical scenarios where persons have encountered these situations, and then even with or having all this information or having plans in place, some of the challenges which they have encountered along the way. So I'm going to open because there have been some questions in here since after Samuel's presentation. If we could just, let me see if I made note of some of them, and then maybe Halcyon or Samuel can take them according to who it's best in line with. I'm seeing, going back to early on, I hope everyone is hearing me. There was a question, where will we fit, this was from Patrick, where will we fit in fluctuating environmental conditions such as fluctuating RH, I guess means relative humidity and temperature. This question came from Patrick. This was during sorry, Samuel's presentation when he was talking about going onto the sites. So I think he was looking at how are you going to deal with stabilizing after the event has happened, relative humidity and temperature. Oh, I see Samuel is on, so maybe Samuel could take that.
No, yes, but I don't understand what is the real question. I mean, where will we fit fluctuating?
Patrick, would you like to clarify the question in the chat, or I don't know if we could allow him to speak. If you could unmute him, Ariana.
Okay, no, I think I understand. I think I understand, assuming that we're doing on-site damage and risk assessment. Obviously, for example, if we go to a site and there has been a fire, or there has been an external agent that is not part of the daily life, we may have a controlled environment with relative humidity and temperature. But if the electrical power goes down, we will have problems. But that has to be that goes into the stabilization area, actually, because we will have to take the objects that are very sensitive for a very high percentage of relative humidity, or textile that it's, something that is exposed to high temperature, or a photograph or a paper that might be heating up instead of being in freeze or cold state. The main action would be to move this object or this document or to a site where we can control. We can bring it back to the temperature or humidity that we think it's the appropriate one. So that takes part of, that is very important to consider when we find a collection, again, that it is not in the proper climatic conditions due to this event. Then the first thing that we have to do, if we cannot, if the condition of the room where these objects are, it's hazardous, or it represents risk, we would have to move this collection or these objects to a place where we can implement a climatic condition that would be suitable for these objects. Or if the building is fine and it was nothing, it is just affected the electrical power, but not necessarily the room, the enclosure where these objects are, we can reinstall the electrical power, or we can use power generators to feed the dehumidifiers or fans or whatever we may need to stabilize the climatic condition. So I hope with this I met your question, I hope.
Yes, I hope so. Also, there was a comment from Valerie concerning another secondary risk that we didn't that can be included, and that's the issue of looting. And I guess that will go hand in hand with securing your site after an event has happened to ensure that those sorts of things don't happen, vandals and looting, after the site has been affected by an emergency or disaster. And the last question that I saw here in the chat is there any set criteria, and this is from Nadia, for standard building codes for the Caribbean for hurricanes or flooding? So this is a question related to building codes in the region as it speaks to, as it relates to hurricanes and flooding.
Not to my knowledge. I know we have like country specific codes, but I guess it's something I'll have to do some more research on. But I know each territory would usually have their own building codes depending on their circumstances. But as a Caribbean wide building code, I'm not too sure. I'm not quite sure.
I would have to say I would agree. I think that's each country tends to seem to have their own set of codes. Of course, there are international standard codes which different people follow, but how much it's followed in each region or each territory, I cannot say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because
so, sorry, Hassan, you were going to comment?
So I was just saying, you know, being from Trinidad and living in Barbados, I know there's certain things that is probably carried out in Trinidad in terms of, say, for instance, the building of houses that I know would not pass code, say, for instance, in Barbados.
Oh, I see something. Okay, so wonderful. We've had a response from Ms. Dawn French in the chat in the Caribbean Cubic OCES draft building code.
Okay.
So I guess this is additional information for us as well.
Definitely.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. So I'm just going to let Samuel introduce then the scenario that he wanted to share with us, and then we will go into the participants to also hear some comments from them. So Samuel.
Okay, I will share a scenario that we're living right now in Guatemala. Which is related to the subject that we are addressing today. As you know, ETA tropical storm just hit the Caribbean a week ago, and now it's going to Florida. It's hitting Florida, and it went through Nicaragua, Honduras, and Guatemala, and now it's going back to the Gulf of Mexico. So it is a very rare event because its course it has been very unpredictable. However, even though it passed very fast, very quickly through Guatemala, it destroyed a lot, more than Mitch. Mitch was in 1995, 1998, I think, I'm confused with the Stan. But Mitch was a long time ago, a big hurricane that affected the same area. Actually, it was Mitch. Exactly 22 years ago, the very same day, November the 8th, it hit us. But this caused more damage. ETA caused more damage. And you can see these pictures here where a lot of plantations and towns and cities were totally flooded. The infrastructure was damaged. 12 bridges collapsed. And there's an immense damage that this has created, like 636 different incidents, more than 3,000 people that are in risk, and 300,000 people affected. So that's just to give you a few figures. So this is something that we're currently living, still living because it's still going on in the Caribbean part of Guatemala. And unfortunately, this affected one of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Quiriguá is the name. We have 3 World Heritage Sites in Guatemala: Tikal, Quiriguá, and Antigua, Guatemala. So basically the place was totally flooded. We can see these pictures here. This site has a lot of stelas or stone structures that are from the classic period of the Maya civilization, around 250 years after Christ. And basically the place, the whole site was flooded. We still do not have reports of full reports, damage assessment reports of if these structures, how badly they were affected, apart from the mud that we see on the floor. And so we can see here another scene of the whole plaza, the main plaza where the structures are. We call them stellars or monolitos, monolites. But basically, if we look at these photographs, it is only mud, hoping that the structures were not affected. Okay, since this happened, which was on Thursday last week, November 6th, we have been trying as a cultural rescue center to contact the Minister of Culture, UNESCO, being a UNESCO World Heritage Site. We have contacted them as stakeholders and actors, do the situation analysis step as we are sharing with you. So the situation analysis showed that the context is, this is a government site. It is a state site. All these sites are from the government. UNESCO it's involved. There's a community nearby and so on. And we have analyzed this context, and we decided that we can only go by helicopter or wait until, or helicopter from the city or from where we are. There's no access because of the landslides, our bridges that damaged the infrastructure. Okay, so the problem we have encountered here, basically, which is very frustrating, is the response from the government. We have offered the Ministry of Culture, and just one important issue that I was forgetting is that last Friday, we were addressing a webinar, the same we're doing with you in Spanish, to the staff of the Ministry of Culture. And while this happened, one of the participants asked, what are you going to do about Quiriguá, about this heritage site, asking us as a cultural rescue center. So I said, okay, we're ready to deploy, we're ready to go, we're ready to collect the experts and tools and materials, and we even have an emergency fund to cover first aid, for the first 72 hours, an emergency response fund. So I said, it is there. I was talking to all the staff of the Ministry of Culture on the web, on this online course, and I said, if you can help, please help us with permissions, with the logistics to go there, contact us. We have our mails and emails, WhatsApps, So up to this point, we're still waiting for the response. That's very frustrating. It's 5 days later. I talked to UNESCO. We work very close to UNESCO Guatemala office. The culture sector officer, attaché, also said, okay, we're also waiting for the Minister of Culture to respond. We already are coordinating actions with UNESCO, being, a stakeholder, but they cannot act also without the government permission, because after all, that's the main authority. And but it is what I want to address is that as a conclusion of this is that even though we have the best equipment, money we have, to access, we have a drone. We offer a drone to fly the site before the water went down to do an initial damage assessment. And we can get the experts, archaeologists on the site, and also external archaeologists to evaluate. But unfortunately, up to this point, it's already noon on Tuesday. no response from the Minister of Culture. So is it a priority? Are they interested? I mean, we're really frustrated. You know, I told UNESCO, that's it. You know, the 72 hours are over. We won't assist anymore. You know, because this is something that it's lack of interest, lack of respect to the institutions, for our cultural heritage. So I'm afraid that this could happen in any other situations. But it is a case that we have everything, but we don't have the permission and the credentials, and not because I don't know what is the reason for this. So it seems like as UNESCO said, it seems like the government wants to take the actions alone without us, which is not good, because this is a systematic procedure. It's a team procedure, and in order not to duplicate efforts, and in order to make efficient the few resources that we have, like for example, we could pay ourselves the Cultural Emergency or Response Center a helicopter to go there, but we cannot go, we cannot land because of the permissions. Also, I think it would be a waste of resources if we think that the government has helicopters, so they could provide a helicopter, and instead of and we could use these resources to clean up the site, to clean up the pieces, to do some first aid stabilization procedures. So I will leave it there, but it is a case that I hope it doesn't happen in any of your countries, because this is a UNESCO World Heritage. I mean, the interest doesn't seem to be there by the government. So that's it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Samuel, for that input. And sadly, I have to say, regionally, we have faced these challenges. We may, and in some instances, have everything in place and have built the relationships, etc. But getting the response at the time when it's needed is sometimes also a challenge. I have two colleagues on standby waiting also to present their own experience similar, where they have had to be responding to instances or been involved in emergency situations, and they will share with us the positives, the challenges, and some of the positives that may have come out of those interactions. So I have Miss Dawn French from St. Lucia. Dawn, are you on with us now? I'm seeing Dawn, so if we can unmute Dawn so she can share her experience with us. And then following her, we'll have a quick comment from Miss Sylvester, Cheryl Sylvester from Grenada. And so Dawn?
Hi, I've unmuted Dawn, and just a comment for Cheryl. I'm seeing two accounts for her, so when it's Cheryl's turn, if she could raise her hand so I know which account to unmute.
Okay, great. Oh, I'm seeing Dawn is unmuted. So Dawn, good afternoon. Thank you for agreeing to share your experiences with us. Well, you heard Samuel's comment and his challenges right now. I'm trying to get into the site. And so the floor is open to you. I'm sorry, I'm seeing her unmuted, but I'm not hearing.
Seeing Dawn said in the chat that she can't hear.
Oh, oh dear. Okay, so but Dawn, you are unmuted. We're seeing you as unmuted. Are you're not hearing us? I'm not seeing anything else.
Can all the attendees hear us?
Yeah.
Can you all? Okay. Yes.
Yes, I'm seeing some yeses. Okay, so then maybe it's something on her end, because we're seeing her as unmuted. Oh, I'm seeing typing from Marla. Okay, so then maybe we could go to Cheryl's comment. In the meantime, Dawn, if you could do a little troubleshooting on your end, because the others are hearing, so I don't know if it's your system. So if we could unmute Cheryl in the
Sure.
internet.
Cheryl, can you use the raise hand feature,
So
please?
which account is live for you? Yes, I'm seeing now. There you go. So just unmute.
Yeah. Cheryl, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Go ahead and right. Lovely. So good afternoon. Are you hearing me, Cheryl?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Okay, lovely. Oh, good. So we were just sharing some of the live experiences of persons who have, of course, experienced the hurricanes or any emergency challenge. And one of the things, as you heard from Samuel, is the lack of immediate response or timely response. So I was just wondering if you could share with us your particular experience in Grenada.
Okay, so in 2004, September 2004, we experienced Hurricane Ivan. And as people hear the expression, Ivan the Terrible, we experienced Ivan the Terrible. It was terrible. When I listened to the session, um, Samuel spoke about being prepared. We had not had a hurricane before that, a hurricane of any major proportion since 1955. So you can well imagine we were not prepared in any way. Personal people did not prepare like the personal space, neither was cultural heritage sites prepared for anything. So what happened eventually that the public library, which is which hosted the public library, the National Documentation Center, as well as the National Archive, got damaged. And another site that contains some of our tangible heritage was the Governor General's residence. In there, we had documents from the 1700s, and as I said, nothing was safeguarded. So a few days after the hurricane, myself and the director of libraries went up there to check, went to the Governor General's residence. And that, when I'm talking about damage, that was totally damaged. It was not, the Governor General could not live there anymore, and everything was in disarray. So in some of the chests, or yeah, I would call it chest, maybe there is a different name for it, but where the records were held, those were underwater. So we thought, well, I spoke to my director, that I'm the library director for St. George's University, and he agreed that he will prepare a place for the records. We're talking about permission. So because the director of libraries was there, and she agreed, well, right, we can do that. We assumed that we had permission to. Unfortunately, after she would have checked with her bosses, it was said that we could not move or we should not move the collections there down to St. George's University. Unfortunately, those records remained there for several weeks afterwards, underwater. So by the time they were removed to some other location, a significant portion of those records were destroyed. And as I said, those records went back to the 1700s. So you can well imagine the kind of loss that we experienced. And there is no way, I guess, some of that may be at the British Library or elsewhere, but there is no way else in Grenada where we could have copies of those kind of records. And that's been the experience I've had. Where I work with St. George's University, we had some water damage, but nothing of consequence that nothing that we couldn't handle. But the records that were at the Governor General's residence, that was a significant collection, which I can say, which we really lost. And I don't think, I do not think that if another catastrophe occurs, we'll be, I don't think we'll be any better off. We will be maybe worse off. When Hurricane Ivan passed, I'm sure people would have heard the slogan, "We're building back better." Well, of course, we build back better in some areas, but cultural institutions have not fared any better.
Oh, thank you so much, Sharon, for those comments. And clearly, 2 points I'm seeing coming out of there. And I know in Trinidad and Tobago, this is something we face. The issue of a long time between one emergency and another, where sometimes you're always preparing, you're getting the warnings, you may have had things in place, but because a disaster or an emergency did not happen for several years, some complacency sets in, and then people don't respond or they don't monitor and maintain those emergency procedures and having those things in place. So that's one. And the issue of permissions, so that in one instance she thought she had permissions to go in, yes, but then someone else then was saying, no, you can't give the permission. Somebody else saying, no, you can't enter the site. And then several days, weeks, months may pass. And as we all know, by the time you actually get there, the things may be unsalvageable. So clearly those two things come out in those comments. And thanks so much, Sharon. I'm seeing Dawn. I don't know if we can. Let's see if we can get a quick comment from Dawn because time is moving on us. Dawn, are you hearing us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, lovely, good.
Okay, great. Good afternoon. I am a former national disaster coordinator, so I'm going to take it from the other side. In St. Lucia, we don't have an association of heritage agencies. And what you're saying about having a gap between events, you may not have a national event, but you have quote unquote small events. Soon, just before Brazil lost its National Museum in fire, we lost our Folk Research Center in fire. We had paintings in there that will never be replaced. The family lent it to the FRC and it went up in flames. No insurance will ever put that back. Last week, whilst we were having the webinar, the Principal Information Officer for the Government Information Service held a press conference to indicate that vandals had broken into the studios, cracked open the hard drive and poured damaging liquid, and they've lost terabytes of information that had been digitized. I'm told that the original tapes are still available, but that's decades of digitizing that has just gone down the tube. So there are the small events we need to take notice of. Also, you need to, many of the countries that I have identified over the last couple of sessions are members of the CDIMA network. That includes Haiti and Suriname. I think there are about 18 countries. And so a lot of what I'm going to say applies to those countries. So Trinidad, Barbados, Grenada, Jamaica, all these are members of CDIMA. All these countries have a national disaster office. Your agencies need to sit down with the national disaster coordinator and dovetail into the system at the national level. Because if you're going to move at the regional level as well, it is through the national office that will make it so much easier. To understand the damage assessment timelines, because this is one of the problems we have as disaster coordinators, that some agencies don't understand the tight timeline. You heard the gentleman say that after 72 hours, the window is closed and the opportunity is lost. And when that is lost, you are now scrambling to find for yourself international aid that has gone. For us in disaster management, it is 48 hours. the Eastern Caribbean Donors Group meet in Barbados, the Western Caribbean Donors Group meet in Jamaica. And so depending upon where it's happening, the donors meet. And if after 2 days, you cannot tell a donor what is wrong in your country, they will move on to the earthquake in Turkey, to the fire in Australia, to a volcanic eruption in Central America, and your opportunity is lost. It has happened here with heritage agencies where I have fought with them to get that 48-hour report. The report comes in 6 months later. I thank them for it and I file it. And the opportunity is lost for donors to see what the problem is. Now, I want to work the timeline back. So the report needs to be in the hands of CDIMA to go to the ECDG meeting at the 48-hour mark, which means I must have the report minimum 44 hours at the 40, and this is, when I say the 44-hour mark, I'm talking about like an all clear. So 44 hours after an all clear, I must have the report, which means at 36 hours, my national chairperson for damage assessment must have all the reports from the sectors, because sectors write things differently. So how you as cultural people going to write your report, which works for your sector, is not the way agriculture is going to write the report, and is not the way tourism is going to write the report. So my chairman usually an engineer, will sit down and take all the sector reports and make one national report that can be read and make sense to anybody looking at it. So he needs time, which means you need to have your report 30 hours after the all clear so that you can put it together and submit it to your national disaster coordinator and of course to your partners internationally, so that we can do what we have to do in the office to get it to Barbados. In our case, we're relating to Barbados. Haiti would relate to Jamaica. Bahamas would relate to Jamaica. Trinidad would relate to Barbados as well, because that's where the donors are meeting. That has to be done in a way that CDIMA can take it to that meeting and put it on the table. Now, if any sector is not part of that report in the first instance, opportunity lost. Now, a lot of agencies have a problem with the 48, well, not even the 48-hour mark, earlier than that, based on the timeline I'm giving you, because they want a perfect report. I'm looking at the presentations about GPS coordinates and photographs and setting up finances. That's later down the road. If you cannot look out your window and say the archives has lost its roof and water is pouring in, you don't have a problem. And that, I think, is one of the challenges of understanding how disaster management works. And so I'm really urging that as a first step, you have some kind of dialogue this week, because the hurricane season doesn't look like it's going to end. Another one has just formed, subtropical theta. And so you need to have that meeting, because even if you don't have a national event, there are layers of, in CDIMA, there are 3 layers. There's layer 1, layer 2, layer 3. Layer 1, tier 1, is that you can handle the scenario and you write a brief to let CDIMA know that you had so the Folk Research Center burned down. I write the report to let them know that we had an incident in St. Lucia and we took care of it. Layer 2 is that when we had the fire at the Petit Piton and I needed specialized firefighting equipment because we don't have the capacity to fight fire via the air. So I needed CDIMA to talk to the US ambassador to see how they could assist us with that particular technical requirement. That's a level 2. Level 3, all hands on deck. So we're looking at the earthquake in Haiti, Hurricane Maria hitting Dominica. You need everybody in. A lot of discussion has taken place about deployment. This is not a holiday. So people, if you know you cannot do earth thy pillow, stone thy pillow, earth thy bed, deployment is not for you. You cannot go into a country that has victims of a disaster and expect them to feed you. You need a sleeping bag, because if you are lucky, you will get a bed. I have slept on beds. I have slept on garden furniture. I have slept on the floor. I always have my sleeping bag with me. Let's get very practical. If you are menstruating, you need your tampons and your sanitary pads to go in there, because deployment is usually for 2 weeks. You need every food that you are going to need with you. So you need your powdered coffee, your powdered juice, anything that you can add water to in powder form, you take it in and take a 2-week supply. Your tin food. I mean, it's just like preparing for a hurricane at home. When I am deploying and they call me, I just scrape everything off the cupboard shelf and drop it in a bag. When I'm leaving, if I've got anything left, I leave it for the victims. I'm coming back lighter. You will always go in overweight. And so another reason you need to dovetail into the disaster office, because if Trinidad is going into Barbados to provide assistance, you are going in overweight. And the disaster office is going to liaise with the airline so that you can go in overweight, because you need to go in overweight. You need, I went in for Maria. The day after Maria hit, I was in Dominica. Look at a 1.5 liter bottle of water. That is what I bathed in for my first week there. When I found a 2-liter bottle of water, I thought it was Christmas. Right? Then eventually we moved and we found one of the many rivers in Dominica and we bathed in the river. But before that, I bathed in a 1.5 liter bottle of water. That is what I used to bathe every night. And so I really wanted to say that, because I understand that y'all are preparing to maybe go into another country to assist them. But when you go into a country that is hit so badly that they need assistance, you are going into a battle zone. Make no mistake. Pull up any picture of Palestine and put it next to the earthquake in Haiti, and unless you see the landmarks, you will not know the difference in the two. I see looking at your clock, so I'll stop there.
Yes. I thank you so much, Dawn. Thank you so much for that input. And that is really very important for us. And this is why I was glad to see that we had a mix in our participants of not only heritage practitioners, but we had some persons from what we call here our regional corporations, our first responders, and disaster management experts. And that is the information we need also. We would do our
I just
best.
wanted to add something
Yeah.
that I'm not sure for the other countries, but in St. Lucia, part of the damage assessment protocol is an aerial reconnaissance.
Okay.
Because everybody cannot go. So the
Yes.
protocol here is that we get a helicopter and a cameraman, an experienced cameraman, and they do the aerial photography. The sectors tell us where they want, and the helicopter flies around and takes the pictures, and then back in the emergency operations center, everybody can view the footage, because sometimes, as shown in the pictures for ETA, you can't always go into the zone. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you once again. All right, so we are really close to the end, and I will beg your indulgence for us to go on to have our last segment, which would be an introduction to our your toolkit for if you need to be outside or be prepared. And some of the issues that have come up here will certainly be mentioned. And well, when I'm wrapping up, I'll tell you what some of what will come up tomorrow, which will feed into what was discussed by Ms. French. So thanks both Cheryl and Dawn for sharing their experiences, and of course Samuel for letting us know what's going on with you. And I think in addition to just, as Dawn has said, learning and getting this information about what we should do, we also need to remember what can happen when the reality of the situation is there, and what we can also do to be creative and make sure that we respond appropriately. So I'm going to just open up to Halcyon to continue with the last aspect of today's presentation, the toolkit, the disaster management toolkit. So Halcyon. Oh, I missed a section.
I would like to thank Dawn and Cheryl so much for giving your insights into the experiences that you have. It's quite jarring, and I hope we all take away from all these experiences what happens. At the end of the day, it's about saving life and limb. And but whatever interventions we could make where the heritage sector is concerned, by making that, impressing upon our stakeholders the importance of also going in and saving our heritage for our people for generations is also quite important as well. So that's something that we have to fight for as well. But thank you all so much for your contributions. So Ariane, do you have the poll question? Okay. So everyone, do you have access to a disaster toolkit in your institution?
I'm gonna leave the poll up for 2 minutes.
No problem. It would also be good if anyone wants to share what they have within the toolkit. You could put your hands up and speak to it for about a minute or two, and we can go from there. Just to get some insight into what measures you put in place in your institutions or even within your community regarding a disaster toolkit, if you have one. Right.
30 seconds again.
No problem. Okay. All right, so we have 6 participants who said yes, they do, and 14 who said they don't. Of the 6, do you wanna elucidate a little bit about what you have within your institutions as what constitutes a disaster toolkit?
Cheryl has her hand raised. Would you?
Yeah,
Yep, I'm gonna let Cheryl talk now.
Thank you for taking the poll.
Okay, so we do not have a disaster toolkit within our institution, but what I would say, I have created my own toolkit, or what I call my go bag, in the event of a disaster. So in that bag, I have like blankets and personal stuff. Then I do like is the lady from St. Lucia said, I have my tin stuff, my flashlight, battery flashlight, as well as solar lights. I have battery flashlight, so I have batteries. I have all like foodstuff, so tinned dry milk that we can be reconstituted. I have like sardines. I have stuff like crackers, some sugar, um, cereal that could be used, and like potato,
Right.
things that we can that can be reconstituted and stuff like that. So in the event of any disaster, I can pick up my go bag, what I call my go bag,
Yeah.
and go with them. In fact, and in there I have medical stuff like my medication,
Right.
like plasters, even mentilated spirits and stuff like that.
Right.
So I think I'm ready to go.
And one thing that we also need to be cognizant of is our documents.
Absolutely. And
And
have
sure
a knife or a knife set that would have an opener with it, a
yeah,
tin opener and stuff like that. Yes.
right. So thank you so much for sharing, Cheryl. And I'm sure because of what you've experienced with Ivan and so on, it's made you more cognizant of having to gather these things together.
You know, one of the things that happened before, in fact, it happens every year, but I don't think people pay attention because at the beginning of the hurricane season every year in Grenada, there is a program prepared to prevent.
Mhm.
And so I listened, and fortunately or unfortunately, I was in my house by myself when Hurricane Ivan struck. So, I mean, not only I wouldn't say there was fear. I'm going to say I was totally terrified.
Mhm.
So I had my bag packed, and although I have a portion in my house that has a concrete roof,
Mhm.
my bag was on my back every time I moved. So in the event that I had to basically escape, I was
We're
totally
ready to
prepared.
go.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for sharing. Greatly appreciate it. So, guys, what we're going to talk about is building a disaster toolkit. This is especially so within heritage institutions. So what we need to look at when you're building this toolkit. So Cheryl analyzed first the food items that we should have with us when we're going on deployment, for instance. But what we also have to look at is the safety equipment, especially as a cultural first aider. When you're going to be deployed in an area that, as Dawn described, could be like going into a World War zone. So the checklist as it goes, so having a hard hat to ensure that your head is totally secure in the event debris may come down on you. A high visibility jacket or a vest, that's quite pertinent, especially if you're entering buildings that may be quite dark. Having a wearing full length trousers and a sleeve shirt, just to ensure that nothing nicks you. Because, I mean, you could be susceptible to cuts and bruises. I mean, you're walking into a disaster zone, so you have to be extremely vigilant about how the clothes you wear and the terrain under which you're going in. And closed footwear. So for me, I have a pair of steel tip boots that I would use if I'm going into a site, just to ensure if anything comes down on my feet or anything like that, I'm covered. But also to ensure that the shoes that I'm wearing, I'm able to run at any given time, because you never know. Also have with you a flashlight with spare batteries and a whistle. You'll be like, why a whistle? A whistle could alert you to imminent danger and alert others to imminent danger. So there's certain codes that you actually carry in terms of blowing a whistle. Say for instance, because you may be going into a site and you may encounter a deceased person, for instance. So you have international standards with regard to even how you use the whistle and the markings that you would leave on buildings. Wearing a valve dust mask. Well, it's kind of self-explanatory to ensure that the particles don't get into your system. Industrial safety gloves, because you may have certain instances where you may have to remove things safely. But especially when you're removing things, it's always good to get the sanction of officials, say if it's an engineer or firefighters and so on, if you need to move something, to look for cultural heritage. And having a first aid kit on hand is also pertinent. Insect repellent, definitely. We in the region, especially if you have to go through these dengue periods, for instance, that we're battling in some of our islands right now, you have to be cognizant of that. And you may not have a water supply, but you may have hand sanitizer, and it may help in terms of keeping your hands clean. So what will you need in your toolkit? So you have to be context specific. So as Cheryl spoke about a grab bag, for cultural first aiders, we also have bags in which we could grab and move with at a split second. But to ensure that we have the various tools we need and the documentation we need. If you're a cultural first aider, you cannot go anywhere without documentation. That is quite paramount. And it depends on you, and you will have to get into certain sites. You will need to have the requisite documentation to actually enter certain sites. So that's something that you need to remember as well. So besides having the personal documents, you also have some of the equipment with you, equipment that you can grab at a notice. So tools for documentation of cultural heritage that has gone through a disaster. So some people would use their phones, but you may have to charge your phones. You may go into an area where there is no electricity supply. So you may have to depend on use of a camera and carry spare batteries where that is concerned as well. And and by taking photographic documentation, it would help in giving you an overview of how the materials actually exist in the states that you found it in. Working with sketch pads, grid paper, and notebooks, you may have to go back to those basics. So some people say, oh, you could carry a tablet or anything like that. But as I said previously, you may not be able to depend totally on an electrical, something that is dependent on an electrical supply to be charged. So working with a good old notebook and grid paper, because you have to map out exactly where you're going to be working. Clipboards, back to basics again. They help in terms of actually maneuvering, not having the paper flapping in your hands and so on, and jotting down information. Pencils, waterproof pens, and of the varying colors. A measuring tape is important because especially when you're putting down your grid lines and seeing how fast it, for instance, one object went from where it was previously held. A range pole that could show the distance, or the a lot of surveyors use the range pole, for instance, when they're looking at land and so on. And you can use the range pole to assess the dimensions of a particular artifact, for instance. And cardboard tape and self-adhesive labels to be put on the packing support. So it's not to be put directly on the object, but it's to be put on the packing supports, because the adhesive in itself may put further damage if you actually put it on the item in itself. So you have to be extremely careful. So materials for packing and transport. So some of these things you may be able to find within your local fabric store. For instance, unstarched white muslin or fine cotton to be used, or pure rag paper. And it could be a substitute for acid-free paper. So in a number of our libraries and archives and museums, we use acid-free paper to stabilize our documents and artifacts that would be in our possession. So polyester film a transparent and colorless plastic sheet to store photographs. A number of our institutions also have photographic material stored in various ways. So that's something we could look into. Okay, so when you're transporting materials as well, especially from a site, you need to be careful how it's being done. And usually what we advocate is for the use of an enclosed truck or a truck that is surrounded and has doors and everything. And in the event that's not probable, you can use tarps and so on to ensure that it's not damaged further. So the materials would include tarps or tarpaulins, polyethylene foam, bubble wrap. You can even use something that you may find in your house like a cushion or pillow to ensure that you stabilize the objects. Towels, but towels, white towels, and not colored towels, because the colored towels may run or have dyes in it that could actually react differently to the materials you may be wrapping, for instance. Wooden and plastic crates to use to actually carry the artifacts or the documents, if depending on the type. Plastic trays too can be used, and some of these plastic trays you can actually get at your local supermarkets. And pallets. Why pallets? For in the archives where I work and a number of archival institutions that I know of, especially in the region, we use pallets, especially with the treated wood, to ensure that some of our holdings is lifted off the ground in case of a flood. A couple of years ago, we had a flood, or was my colleagues and I would term it the Great Flood of 2010 at the West Indies Federal Archive Center. And all our holdings were saved after the waters came into the building, because all our holdings were off the ground. So, I mean, these little things could pay dividends, and you can secure your holdings by just having them a couple meters off the ground, and having a pair of scissors as well to cut and paper when necessary. So what you have depicted here is a colleague of mine dealing with some textiles and wrapping them in the paper, the muslin paper. So additional materials that you could probably have in your go bag as well: rope, rulers, buckets, things like that you could probably source from various supply stores, ladders, trolleys, especially those trolleys, and wheelbarrows. Those trolleys, especially those tiered trolleys, to help with the movement of objects, depending on your holdings. So in terms of securing a site, the materials and equipment for securing a site. So caution tape, especially yellow caution tape, could be utilized to ensure that the site is, so people understand that, hey, you shouldn't go beyond it. Sometimes the wire fencing, or the chain link fence as it's called in some places, if accessible, to have that around a site in times of a disaster as well, to keep people out and to protect them as well. And also to have safety signage in strategic spots so that people won't say that, there was no signage up. And it's also used as a deterrent to warn them as well. And to use strong sticking tape to ensure that the signs are held up. And you can also use wooden sticks to help secure the signage as well. And timber planks, depending on the type of structures that you're dealing with. For instance, if it's tangible heritage or buildings you're dealing with. And having step ladders there as well to reach any items that may be kind of hard to reach. But you have to be careful when you're conducting these. So I'd like to thank you. And also, I would like for participants, if possible, to create a list of potential suppliers, because I will be sending a list of items that you should be able to get easily within your territories. So to identify the list of suppliers that could provide these materials so that it can help you to help yourselves in times of a disaster. So disaster, as Dawn mentioned, sometimes it could be small, it could be a flood, it could be a pipe bursting within your holdings, or rainwater coming through your ceilings. You know, so it depends. So disasters could happen at various intervals and various types. So these are the things we need to put in place. So I'll be sending that list and it will be passed on to you through Carbica. So just to have a list of suppliers, that you could identify with the list that I'll be sending to you. So thank you again for listening.
Okay, thank you so much, Halcyon, for giving us some ideas about what we should prepare with, what items we should have on hand to mitigate if a disaster occurs and to respond quickly. So I'm really thanking attendees for their attention and for bearing with us. I'm asking if we have one more segment, and I'm asking people to bear with us. I know we've passed our 3 o'clock hour. I believe we should be able to wrap up at 3:30. Samuel has just one more bit of information he wishes to share with us, and then we will be wrapping up. So I think we can predict that 3:30 we should be off. Coming out of Halcyon's presentation, as she said, we will put the handout with what would be a basic kit response tool with the list of equipment in the Google group to share with all participants. So you will have that information after within the next few days in the Google group. All right. So I'm seeing a hand up. I'm not sure if it is, but if I could just let Samuel finish with it, because it's a very short bit that he has to add, and then we will wrap up the session. And we'll take any closing comments or questions at that point. Thank you so much.
Thank you, April. I would like to conclude my presentation with this very short segment, which is where the 3 steps of the whole framework of situation analysis, damage and risk assessment on site, security and stabilization, will lead us to a final recovery and a rehabilitation. So again, these 3 elements that I mentioned at the beginning are still present. Documentation, risk management, communication, and collaboration are very important, that we consider them all the time. So the recovery and rehabilitation phase or stage of the framework of first aid, it's like if we think of a humanitarian case, for example, if we are sick and we have to go to a hospital, and they may conduct an operation, you know, they may take a piece of our liver or whatever, you know, any problem that we have. And then after we leave the hospital, there is a recovery and rehabilitation period. You know, that we have to take some care, that we have to eat certain food, that we need, you know, certain care to recover properly. So it is the same for a cultural object. So when we think about early recovery, we have to think about post-first aid situation analysis, okay? We have conducted the 3 steps, and now what's next? What will be coming in the next weeks, the next months? So that is something also, that is a context or a situation that we have to analyze in order to keep a plan and also to keep monitoring and so on. So then again, this brings us back to the post-disaster needs assessment. I really like the presentation of Miss French. I assume she's from Civil Protection because she knows very well. She illustrated very well, and she mentioned about these assessments and these reactions that we must conduct immediately or a few hours after an event. So the condition assessment is part of this. So develop mechanisms for coordination, participation, and capacity building. So after the event and after we have recovered our heritage, we have to think of the follow-up, okay? The follow-up includes capacity building, like these courses we're having today. It is important to conduct them periodically, to replicate them in every institution in order to have more capacities to respond and more prepared colleagues or people, a team to respond. Then we have to evaluate the use, function, and meaning of cultural heritage. As some people sometimes may ask us, why do you put so many resources on a particular stone or a particular object or building? So it is also very important to evaluate, the use, the function, and meaning, and if it will last. I mean, if it is rehabilitating properly, if it's worth to continue applying all the resources and knowledge to protect it and so on. So gather resources. Also, it is a final step. After we have conducted all the 3 steps, we will probably encounter some unexpected issues or situations that we were not considering before, or before our actions. So all this information, it will be very valuable for the early recovery period. So that is basically what the early recovery period is all about. I think we have covered the before, during, and after stages of risk management and first aid. In the first 2 sessions, we spoke about the before, the risk management, evacuation, and then in the last 2 sessions, we have spoken about, the framework of first aid. So the manuals and tools are available from the link that was published by Ariana. Thank you, Ariana, for putting the link on the chat. So these manuals can be downloaded from the ICCROM site in English, French, and soon we are translating here at the center the Spanish version. So, but most of you who speak English and French, you already have the manuals on PDFs, so you can download them. And also the manuals at the same site. ICCROM has fantastic publications. These 2 were the 2 ones that we use in the before stage of the framework, and so you can download the evacuation and the guide risk to cultural management. And just to conclude, I said the evacuation was something that could happen, an activity that could take place before or after the event, depends. So thank you very much, and I'll appreciate for staying on. And if you have any questions, please, I'm available.
Okay, thanks again, Samuel, for wrapping up first that all these that have gone before, and then getting us to this point where we are now after the disaster, but preparing in case of the next, or which we may or will come in the way we're living. They're always coming. We also have a hand up following from the last discussion from Dawn. And if we could get a quick comment from you, Dawn, as I promised folks 3:30, or anyone else. Let me see, I'm looking through the chat. No, right, so yes, Dawn. Dawn, are you hearing me?
Hi, Dawn says in the chat that she can't hear again.
Oh, okay. So as we're about to wrap up, if you can share with us.
I got it. I got it.
Okay,
I got
now.
it. I got it. I
Yes.
got it.
Okay.
The technology.
Yes,
Yes.
go
A quick question. I'm new to this. Obviously, my background is disaster management, but I'm not hearing who is deploying y'all, who's sending y'all. Is it your agency, Caribka, or is it ICCROM? When I go CDMA. When the police go, they go the RSS. And the reason I'm asking this is for insurance. When a regional agency sends you, so you're not going as Joe Blow, you're not going as Caribbean citizen, you are going as a representative of a wider grouping. There are things that they must put in place for you. Now, after the Haitian earthquake, just before I deployed, 3 female doctors were kidnapped. They worked for Médecins Sans Frontières. And I went to my permanent secretary and I stated flatly, if I go to Haiti and I die, who is bringing my body back? And he would not release me to go to Haiti until CDMA answered that fundamental question. Eventually, the press reported that the 3 women were released unharmed. I don't know how, harm is a relative statement, but these are dangerous conditions. Some of the conditions have been cited already by Halcyon. St. Lucia, for example, has a viper snake up in the hills. A disaster happens and they start coming down the hill. So there are things that the agency sending you, you have to ask the hard questions. What is the insurance coverage? And the reason I'm asking, because I did not see it in the presentation, and it is very important when you are deploying that you have that answered, because the dangers that you face run a gambit. Thank you.
Okay, thank you again, of course, a very pointed question and comment there, Dawn.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say that at this point, no one has actually deployed any of us.
No.
And we're really at the point of saying we are building that network. We are trying to create that network and make sure that we are in that discussion, as you said, so that we are learning what in the way that how SIDEMA deploys, how UNESCO deploys, how any of the regional responders would deploy. And then because our focus is the first aid to the heritage, we have to insert ourselves at that point when we can, when it's safe to go on site, when life and limb has already been managed and stabilized. So the discussion, at least for us, is we are now building and trying to strengthen that network. So it's still growing. And I'd like to say also coming out of that discussion, tomorrow it will then be very critical because we are going to have the other stakeholders on the team tomorrow. So SIDEMA, UNESCO, ICCROM, and our regional body, Kabika Chen, will be making presentations, and they will say to us, this is what we do. This is how we deploy. These are the things that we need in place. And we're going to talk about, so it'll be very much more an interactive area tomorrow. We are going to talk about how we could make sure
Avril?
that network is built. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Avril, just a correction. You mean on Thursday, not tomorrow.
Yes, Thursday. I apologize. We've been going on for so long. Yes, Thursday is our final session. That's day 5. And the name of the session, of course, is strengthening our networks for us to be ready to respond. So we don't want, as I think someone else said earlier, we're not duplicating effort, we're not wasting resources. We can't afford to. So we need to hear what everybody's role, what they're doing, and then we're looking for ways to build synergies and work together to make sure we're most effective and when we need to respond, not after the fact. So tomorrow, hopefully a lot of that discussion that you have raised will come up, and we will look forward to people's input in that area. I would like to thank you so much, everyone, of course, for allowing us to go a little over our time today. Thank you to our presenters so much, Samuel and Halcyon, for sharing all your experience, your knowledge, your information. And of course, for participants for taking part and sharing your own experiences with us. We do appreciate that. For anyone who have missed, who haven't mentioned, your comments or notes in the chat, we also appreciate that, and we are recording it so that we have that information, and we will, as much as possible, share with all the persons who register, so we'll get that information. If it's not out to you immediately after, but certainly once the whole sessions, all 5 are finished, we will populate the information and share the links and the recordings with you. So I think we can close off. If there's no burning question here. So thanks again, and do have a safe evening, and we look forward to seeing you on Thursday for our final session.
Take care.
Bye everyone. Thank you.